The Hard Rock Empire is on the air, and if you're hearing us now, that means you have adjusted your schedule because, of course, we have adjusted ours because of the time change last weekend. So we are an hour different from whenever you would have been listening to us live, unless you're listening on the East Coast U.S., in which case you're listening at the same time that you would have listened to. We're back for another episode of the Hard Rock Empire. This week we're talking the music of February the 20th. And another good weekend music. And it's good to be back in our normal time slot at 7 o'clock Eastern Time on Sunday evening. And we're going to be getting through the music of February the 20th this week. And then, of course, take you into the vault where we'll talk about a couple of classic albums you need to check out. A lot of good stuff on the agenda this week for the Hard Rock Empire. Joining me in studio, as always, is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It's going. And yeah, it's good to be back at the normal time, although there is something to be said for doing the show and then not having to work the next day.
Yeah.
Like the Saturday show did have that going for it. But yeah, either way, still good to be here. Fun week this week. Anytime I can find something that's completely out of left field and not like what I normally pick, I think it makes the discussion more interesting, and that's definitely what we got this week.
Yeah, there's no question that when we get to your pick, it is absolutely not.
I was gonna say bonkers.
Yeah, it's just
which I'd never say.
Yeah, it's definitely different. Like, and we'll talk about that more, when we get to your pick. But it is, every so often we get stuff on the playlist that is just a little bit outside of maybe what we would typically pick, or potentially something that it just kind of intrigues us in a way that the standard stuff we talk about every week doesn't. And that's just kind of a tease for what Mike's going to be sharing with us this week, because it is definitely one of the more unique and interesting albums that we've come across on the podcast. But a few notes before we get to the music of this week. Of course, join the Discord. The Discord link is pinned in the chat. We talk about our schedule up there, and at some point we will be maybe doing a couple catch-up episodes over the next couple months to kind of get back to a little closer to on schedule. So hopefully you'll join us for those, and maybe at some point we will move off of the Sunday time slot. Right now it does kind of work schedule-wise, but I will admit that when you're sitting there on Sunday going through all this, it does just kind of lead you to think, oh man, work tomorrow, like I got to go back to work. So, it's not as fun maybe as it could be if we knew that it wasn't leading into a Monday morning. And obviously for some people listening to us, it may already be Monday morning. So maybe not the most ideal time. We'll talk about that going forward. But again, join the Discord. We encourage you to check that out. That's where we have all of our schedules. And if any other projects we do, you'll learn about it there. But, of course, we're going to get to the new music, the music of February the 20th. Of course, each and every week, Mike puts together a YouTube playlist based on the releases of a given date. And as I said, that date is February the 20th. I will paste that playlist into the chat in both YouTube and Twitch, and you can check that out. And you should check that out, because there is definitely quite the variety of music this week on top of the stuff that we will be talking about. And we go through those, and we each pick a band and an album to spotlight on the podcast. But there's always more than just two bands and two albums to spotlight. So before we get to what was picked, and again, you're going to want to hear about this band that Mike has picked, because this album is just totally unique. A lot of other stuff this week and some good stuff on the playlist. So, Mike, before we get to the stuff that was part of our choices for this week, what else jumped out at you this week?
Yeah, so as far as kind of the major releases go, we did have a new one from Michael Monroe, Outer Stellar, newest solo album from him. He is obviously famously known as the Hanoi Rocks frontman. Newfound Glory with a new album, Listen Up. It's their 12th studio album, so if you're into Florida-based pop punk, which, there was a time when a lot of people were, give that a listen. The playlist track was decent. Like, I'm not a huge fan of theirs, but I thought the playlist track delivered what I think people would want from them. And the Veer Union with their album Reinvention. It's the newest from the Canadian alternative metal band. Another one that the playlist track was solid. Not necessarily my style all the time, but definitely worth checking out.
I think there were some things, and like you said, I think there were a few other things that was not exactly the type of music that would immediately draw me in to listen to the whole thing. But what I heard of it was very quality. Chris joining us in the chat. Welcome, Chris. It was high quality. So I think if you are looking for something different than maybe the stuff we talk about, I think you're going to find some interesting stuff this week.
Yeah, a couple of the other ones that I did get a chance to listen to, Eon Gods, Born to Light, German symphonic power metal band. I thought that was a really strong album. Also Serpent Gates, The Veil of Darkness, Finnish heavy metal band, kind of Bruce Dickinson meets Black Sabbath kind of sound. I thought that was kind of unique and worth listening to. There were some re-releases and box sets. No box sets, but re-releases. Dangerous Toys, they're having their 1994 album Pissed re-released, I think for the second time, actually. Every time I listen to a Dangerous Toys album, I enjoy it. I've not listened to that one, but their early stuff was good. Game Over, re-releasing their Crimes Against Reality album from 2016. Listened to one of their more recent albums a while back. Definitely solid stuff. And the one that caught my attention was one from Montes, Winds of Change. It's a 1988 solo project from the guitarist from the band Venom, Montes. Interesting because Venom's kind of widely regarded as like the first black metal band. Like they kind of really leaned into that. And the solo album, though, is basically like heavy metal AOR-y kind of stuff. Just not what you'd expect from this guy. But what I listened to that was definitely interesting.
Yeah, like you said before we went on the air, obviously because they were a band that was basically a forerunner in black metal, there had to have been something before black metal that inspired the members of this band. And turns out that maybe some of that was a little more on the melodic side, which is always kind of interesting when it's so different than maybe what they're known for. And it's not the first time we've had that happen where solo artists or members of bands have shown up on our playlist and the stuff that they do solo is almost completely different than the stuff they were doing in their band.
It kind of reminds me, I think it was Mark Tremonti has this thing where he goes around and tours and does like Sinatra songs.
Oh, wow.
Like, totally not metal or hard rock at all. And that's like a thing. Like it's understood when you go to it, that's what you're getting. So, you kind of want your rock heroes to have kind of a wide range of interests because I think it ultimately makes their product more interesting.
And I think maybe we're in a day and age now where some of those guys are big enough that they can do cool things like that, where maybe in the past you didn't see that as often. But I think that's a really cool element when you've got these guys who are known for a certain genre of music and they can say, hey, this isn't just... I'm not just this one thing. Like, look at all this, because a lot of these, especially when we get into like the power metal and symphonic metal and speed metal, when you're talking about this, they're so technically gifted that it's not surprising that some of them may have classical music background. So it's not too shocking to see that the influences may be a little bit different. And I think it's pretty cool when they're kind of secure enough in what they do to say, hey, let me play some Sinatra for you, and people aren't going to look at that weird. It's kind of a cool thing.
But I think there's probably a certain fun factor to it.
Yeah.
Like I do the same thing every day. I play the same music. This would be kind of neat. Let's give this a shot.
Yeah.
Why not?
I think that's really awesome. So, any interesting names this week?
There were not, actually.
Bummer.
But looking at next week's, I think we're going to...
make up for it next week.
I think we're going to have some pretty good ones next week. I'm excited for that already.
Well, there's your teaser. You're going to have to come back and join us next Sunday night at 7 o'clock Eastern for episode 107 of the Hard Rock Empire to find out what some of those names are. Maybe some of them will end up being among the bands we choose for next week. But if not, we'll certainly have some great music for you. And it's time to get to the great music this week. And like I said, we have heard such a wide variety of music over, again, 106 weeks. So we are now past 2 years of doing this, basically. 104 weeks would be 2 years. So we are into that year 3. We have heard everything probably in 3 years.
Yeah.
But I don't know that we've heard anything like what you chose for your pick this week. And I think it kind of redefines what it means to be a prog rock band, and I'm interested in hearing more about it because it's so fascinating. So, Mike, tell us what you got for us this week.
Yeah, first off, this could probably be an entire episode, just delving into this, both the career of the person involved, and then also just what this album is and what it is a part of. There's so much going on here, and honestly, and I mentioned it in the chat, I think both in the general chat and the admin chat, when I first heard the playlist track, like, it was so over the top. I thought, like, I in my head, I could picture Muppets singing it. Like, that's kind of how I felt about it. And I knew at that point, okay, I had to listen to this whole thing, and it took me about 2 days to get through it. And Man, I'm so glad I did. That being said, we are talking about the newest from Clive Nolan. It is the third part of a trilogy of progressive, conceptual, almost stage play albums. It's I can't think of any other way to describe it, really. But yeah, it's Clive Nolan's newest. It is The Mortal Light.
Yeah, I encourage everybody to go listen to the playlist track on our playlist, and obviously you'll get to hear a clip of this one coming up, but I just don't know if you're not listening to at least a whole song, you're not getting the full picture of what this is all about, because this is out there for sure.
And I inadvertently did myself a service by picking the first track for the playlist, because just throw it out there. There are 35 tracks in this thing.
Yeah.
Any one of them could have been like, okay, I don't know what's going on here. I'm not really. Anyone by itself could have been a hit or a miss, but the fact that I picked the first thing you hear, the intro to this story, I think it legitimately had me wanting to know what's going on and who these characters were and what they were doing next. So I'm glad I went that route. I think that was really important.
Yes, 2 hours and 19 minutes. I want to go and throw that out there. So that's why when Mike said it took him a couple days to get through it, that's really the reason why.
So Clive Nolan is this progressive keyboard hero, essentially. The man has been around forever, well-regarded, just highly renowned. He's been and continues to be the keyboardist in several long-running bands, including the bands Arena since 1995, Pendragon since 1985, and Shadowland since 1996. He wrote the first rock opera, at least I believe it was his first one, She, under the band name Kamura. He ultimately, from that, created the Kamura Theater Company. The first installment of this trilogy, Alchemy, was released in 2013, and it's had a run at the German Street Theater in 2014. So they were actually kind of doing it on stage in costume. There are videos on YouTube of it. It's pretty wild. The sequel to that, King's Ransom, hit in 2017, and here we are now in 2026 with The Mortal Light. Nolan was named Best Keyboard Player by the Classic Rock Society 7 times in the past 20, 30 years. I've not listened to the first 2 parts of this rock opera trilogy, so I don't know the characters going into this, but if it's anywhere close to what The Mortal Light is, they're undoubtedly amazing, and I definitely have to check them out. This won't be for everyone. The story's 2 acts long, 35 tracks, 2 hours and 19 minutes, like you mentioned. I listened to it over 2 days. Highly theatrical. Has this steampunk Victorian setting to it. The music itself is proggy, but also really folk rocky at times too. And it's seriously just music to tell the story. It's not like Mindcrime, where it's like they wrote a bunch of songs that just happen to tell the story, which is how I kind of look at Mindcrime. It's like, it's a great story, but they were writing hit songs too. This is very much, we're performing a play set to music.
Yeah.
So you got to kind of know that going into it, or not, which I didn't. So that being said, the vocals are tremendous. The story is fun. It's high fantasy kind of stuff as far as, you're going to purgatory, you're fighting a witch, you're doing all sorts of fun stuff, reconciling with a former enemy that kind of gets to seek redemption. The band itself includes Clive Nolan, obviously, on keyboards, vocals, orchestration, additional percussion. You also got Scott Hyam on drums, Arfin Isaacson on bass, and Mirko Sangrigoli on guitar. The bigger thing probably for this is the cast of singers. You have Clive Nolan playing Professor Samuel King, Gemma Ashley as Ava Bonaducci, Robbie Gardner as Tom Worthy, Christine Eckerberg as Alice Hyde, Natalie Barnett as Lady Agatha Gill, Ryan Morgan as Father Caleb, Andy Sears as Lord Henry Jagman, Chris Lewis as Edwin Deeks, Laura Piazzi as Macaria, Guy Barnes as William Gardell, Verity White as Dr. Josephine Kendrick, and Ross Andrew as the Master of Ceremonies. A lot of characters here for what is 2 hours of rock opera. Standout tracks, there are a lot of them, obviously. Track 1, Wedding. Track 3, Demigod. Track 5, Magician. 6, Decisions. 10, Guidelines. 15, Macaria. 16, Port. 17, Confession. 22, Witch. 26, Satisfactory. 27, Justice. And 31, Siege. of all those, I believe it was Justice that I selected to take a listen to.
Let's check this out. This is Clive Nolan's The Mortal Light. This is track number 27 on this album, Act 2, Justice. Let's listen to a little bit of this now.
I accept that he's here, but I don't have to like it. What I'd do if I could, well, you don't need a psychic. We may need him now, regardless of his sense. Just don't ask me to forgive. What kind of justice chooses to let this man walk away from the souls that he preyed on? What kind of fair play leaves the dead unpaid, turning away from the souls that he preyed on? What kind of justice chooses to let this man walk away from the souls that he preyed upon?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you even picked a section of this to listen to, just because when you're talking about something that is so abstract as this, it's hard to try to take a 30-second clip of that and say this is what the whole album's going to sound like, because it really isn't. But
No,
this is really the best you can do.
Yeah, it's really about just finding a clip that I think will entice someone to want to listen to the whole thing. And there's kind of one or two schools of thought there. There's either pick something so over the top, like theatrical, that it piques your interest, which is kind of, I mean, track 1, Wedding, is kind of that. It's very, okay, they're celebrating something, what's going on here. These characters sound really over the top. And then like a track like Justice, which is honestly one of the harder rocking songs on the album. So yeah, there's a lot of variety there. And in an age where you're going to listen more likely kind of distracted, you might be like going for a walk or working. It's a great thing. You can listen to podcasts all day, or you could pick just a 2-hour period and say, hey, I'm going to listen to this album. And I think you'll be satisfied.
Yeah, definitely check that out. I'm definitely going to go back and check that out. I'm very intrigued. And again, if you want to start with the playlist track, it is the first track off the album. So that's a good way to kind of get your foot in the door if you want to check that out. But
that's how it's intended to be listened to, right?
For sure. But Clive Nolan, just wild stuff from them. Definitely worth checking out. Something completely different. I'm going with something a little more traditional, but every bit as outstanding, honestly. We are headed to Norway for a heavy power metal band from Oslo. This is Rozario with Northern Crusaders. If Mike's pick was outside the box, to me, this was right down the middle of the plate for me, as far as something that I would absolutely just pick 10 times out of 10. The band's first single was released in 2023. This is their second full-length album after 2023's To the Gods We Swear. The band is made up of David Rozario on vocals, Stein Hertholm on guitar, Taran Lister on guitar, Anders Halsen Engum on bass, and Peppa Bruvol, on drums. This was interesting, and reading the Angry Metal Guy review of this honestly was very parallel to the way I thought of this, because when you hear the title of the album and you look at the album art, which you can see on the screen, I think the first thing you think of is this is going to be over-the-top Viking metal, and it's probably going to be too far out there because there's some of that. This really isn't that at all. This is just outstanding power metal. The songs are really well written. They're well performed. They're catchy songs, but they're not cheesy songs. They're just great music from the start to the end. Angry Metal Guy noted how fast the album goes by. It's 50 minutes, and it flies by. It's so good that you're just through the album before you even realize it. The first 2 tracks on the album are the kind of the singles that have come out, but I would argue that there are some tracks later in the album that I think, to me, were even better than the 2 singles, and the singles are really good. It's just really well done. You should definitely check out the Angry Metal Guy review. He definitely also judged the band by the cover, thinking they were going to be one thing, and became more and more frustrated as he liked the album more and more every time he listened to it. It's pretty funny stuff. He kind of devolves into madness in the review. It was really well done, but he was really, really high on this album, as am I. there wasn't really any track on this that I thought was bad. I thought it was really good from start to finish. Probably the most complete release I've picked so far this year. These guys are obviously still kind of on the way up. This is their second album. I'm excited to see where they go from here because I thought this was outstanding. Standout tracks include Fire and Ice, We Are One, Crusader, and the track we're going to listen to on the podcast is Free Forever. So let's check these guys out. This is Rozario with their new album, Northern Crusaders. This is the fourth track off of that album, Free Forever. Let's listen to a little bit of that now.
But now I'm telling you, I'm done with you. No more pain or wicked lies. No more evil paradise. Run for cover. This time I'm on your own. No more darkness, it's goodbye. To the poison in my life. And it's all over. I'll be free. I'll be free forever.
Yeah, I really don't know what else to say about this album. You know, every so often we come across one of these albums that I think will probably end up in my regular rotation on YouTube Music, and this is absolutely one of those. I just thought it was really outstanding, beginning to end. Mike, your thoughts on these guys?
Yeah, I definitely agree as far as the name of the album made me think Viking metal. The cover made me think, I'm not so sure about this anymore. The cover I honestly felt maybe a little generic in ways. You just have the picture of the band there. Like, I wasn't sure what to expect, but man, yeah, this album was awesome. Like, I put it right up there with the other top albums for me. I could have easily picked it if I hadn't been totally just immersed in 2 hours of prog theatrics, but yeah, really solid. It's cool to see bands that haven't been around all that long making music like this.
Yeah, it's always great to come across, and I thought these guys knocked it out of the park. So excited to see what these guys continue to do. Great stuff from Rozario. Definitely encourage you to check these guys out. One of my favorite albums of the year so far. But that is all for the new music. If you're watching on Twitch and you're not subscribed to us, which is completely okay, you're going to get a 90-second ad coming up in just a moment. If you're on YouTube or if you are subscribed to us on Twitch, you'll get to hear us ramble about stuff, and we'll be back in about 90 seconds with The Vault, where Mike and I will give you a couple classic albums to check out. And we encourage you, if you could, to stick around through those ads if you're on Twitch. That helps us tremendously. Continues to try to fund some of the things we want to do with this podcast. So please stick around. But once that is over, we'll be back to talk more music on the other side of this 90-second break. So please stick around for that. Unless you were on YouTube, in which case you're going to continue to hear us talk over the next 90 seconds. 2 releases this week that we picked that were both amazing, but like completely opposite ends of the spectrum. And I think that's been my favorite thing about this podcast is there's just music that, I mean, really neither one of these bands are making music that I necessarily thought was prevalent.
Yeah.
When we started this podcast 2 years ago. And now to find out that not only are they prevalent, but there's so many acts doing it at such a high level, it makes it so much fun.
It's fun, but it's also kind of frustrating in a way because you look at Rozario, it's like they've been around since 2013. It's like, I would have liked to have known they were around in 2013.
Yes.
Like, why wasn't someone informing me the second they got up and running? And obviously, like a Clive Nolan who's been around forever, it's like, you know, I own one of the Arena CDs, but I never really equated that to, oh, that's Clive Nolan. That's I really just didn't know. I think I'd stumbled into Arena just from one of those streaming services years ago. The album Pepper's Ghost, I think it was, but like no one's telling me, hey, here's the stuff you need to find. It's really on you to find it yourself. And while that's liberating, it's also frustrating.
And our hope is that this podcast and the playlist that Mike put together and the bands that we choose are a way for us to do some of that work for our listeners, put this stuff out in front of you and say, hey, there is really cool stuff out there. Here it is. You may have to continue to dig, but at least we're giving you a heads up on that. So that's kind of one of the big goals of this podcast. But we are back, so thank you for sitting through those ads if you did that on Twitch. It is time to get to the vault, where Mike and I will each talk about a couple of classic albums you need to check out. Mike working through a couple of different vault gimmicks at the moment, and we are back to Sonic Temple, which of course is coming quickly.
Fastly approaching.
Just a couple months away now, less than a couple months away. In fact, as that'll be coming up in May, and Mike's been going through different stages to try to spotlight and act on some of these, starting with the smaller stages and working his way toward the bigger stages. And number one, we knew from the beginning of this gimmick that there was not going to be time to go through every stage on every day because you were just simply not going to, you were going to run out of time. The other thing, too, is there are simply just some stages and some days that probably just don't have a band out of that group that you would be interested in seeing, and that's okay, too. So as you continue on through this gimmick, what do you have for us this week?
Well, I think it kind of goes back to, man, I'm glad Sonic Temple has 5 stages, because ultimately, any given day, there might be a stage where I'm just not really interested in the bands that are performing, and nothing against the bands themselves. It's just, obviously, we all have style preferences and music, and I'm not the biggest deathcore fan. So when I start looking up bands, and some of the bands I'd heard of before, and kind of figured that was what they were, and when they're all deathcore from Florida, from Tennessee, deathcore from Australia, it's like, man, I don't think I'm the guy to review one of their albums.
Yeah,
not that they aren't potentially great, but I'm not the one to be able to say that.
That's fair.
So stage 3 on Thursday, not for me. Let's just say that. Not a big fan of deathcore, like I mentioned. So let's move on to Friday. Friday, stage 3. I knew there would be a little more variety there, and at least something I could kind of sink my teeth into. The options were Simple Plan. Not a huge fan of theirs. Not a big pop punk guy. But, they are what they are. Story of the Year, post-hardcore band. Atreyu, another post-hardcore band who I am fairly familiar with. Bless the Fall, metalcore from Arizona. Crown the Empire, metalcore from Texas. The Word Alive, metalcore from Arizona. And Woe Is Me, metalcore from Georgia. So at the very least, we're talking post-hardcore metalcore.
Yeah.
More up my alley. Not quite to the extreme of deathcore, but kind of looking through these, the one I ended up deciding to go with, a band who I was into for a few albums back in the mid-2000s and kind of dropped off of them, but good to see they're still out there doing it, even if they've had some lineup changes. That band's Atreyu, and we were talking today about their 9th studio album from 2023, that being The Beautiful Dark of Life.
Yeah, they're one of those bands that I knew of. I probably know some of their big hits from that early era, but it was a style of music that was it kind of became popular after maybe I had gotten out of the rock scene in that early 2000s, being just a little bit older and not really diving into the new stuff. But when I saw you'd pick them, I thought, kind of interested to see what their newer stuff sounds like.
Yeah, and truth be told, I was a little late to the party on these guys too. I think a lot of people jumped on them probably in 2004 with The Curse. I took a little longer because typically when something is brand new, it takes me a while to adopt it. I don't care for it at first. I'm too busy listening to my big 4 thrash bands at that point in time. But I did buy their 2007 album, Lead Sails Paper Anchor, really great album. So was the follow-up to that, Congregation of the Damned. A little gap there between Congregation of the Damned and Long Live, which came out in 2015. But and I thought maybe a little bit of a drop-off there. So after that 2015 album, I kind of stopped paying attention. Whether that's fair or not, I don't know. I'd have to listen to a few of the albums in between. They did release an album in 2018, In Our Wake, and one in 2021, Baptized. But fast forward to 2023, this is actually an album, kind of a compilation in a way. Over the course of 2023, they released 3 EPs that had 4 tracks each, then ultimately combined them together into this album with 3 additional new tracks. So kind of a more modern approach to releasing music, I think, where you're kind of giving people small bursts and then maybe combining it together when you're ready. So the band parted ways with their original lead vocalist, Alice Varkatzis, in 2020. Thankfully for a band like Atreyu, they've always done kind of the 2 vocalist thing. So you still have Brandon Sowler there, who's been there from the beginning, originally as their drummer, and then transitioned to being one of the vocalists a few years into their career. So with him there still, you're kind of getting that same familiar Atreyu sound, like it's not a complete departure. And honestly, after listening to highly theatrical folk progressive rock opera music for a good portion of the week, kind of the straightforward metalcore of Atreyu was a pretty good palate cleanser. Like, it's not complicated. It's heavy. It's not too heavy. The vocals, they work really well together. So, would I put it on the level as Congregation of the Damned or Lead Sails Paper Anchor. Not really, and that is what it is. That you're gonna have preferences, but there are some standout tracks on the album, including "Drowning," "Insomnia," "God/Devil," "Gone," "I," "Death or Glory." You're not gonna be disappointed listening to it. It's just maybe not the glory days, I suppose, but still solid album.
Yeah, and just glad to see him still out there doing it and releasing music and being out there and being on these stages at events like Sonic Temple. It's great to see. So if you're a fan of theirs, I'm sure you're already planning on checking them out at Sonic Temple, but if not, maybe you should plan on picking up a ticket at Sonic Temple and checking those guys out. Next week we'll be back to You're Going Through the Years as we have, I think we're up to 1971 next week.
I believe we are.
So
I've started looking at the choices there, which, I mean, that era, you just had so many bands starting out or releasing just iconic albums. It's going to be a challenge, but I look forward to it.
Yeah, it'll be coming up next week on the Vault, so check that out. I'll have a new gimmick as well next week. That's not a new gimmick for you, but because we are to the end of the Frontiers bands, that has been my gimmick on the Vault. We've gone A to Z. We've spent a couple weeks on each letter. There's only one Z band listed on their Wikipedia, so we only had one choice. That was a bit of a problem just because it was kind of hard to find any information on this band at first. The Frontiers page on this band had broken links for their album art, which is usually not an encouraging sign, but we managed to cobble together enough to tell you about the Z band for Frontiers. This is Zion with their self-titled album, which came out in 2006. It was a project like so many of these where you have music, you have a bunch of songs laying around, and obviously some of these songs were written by the band. We'll talk about that in a moment, but I just need to find the right front man, and they bring in Freddie Kersey from Sheriff and Alias to basically be the front man for this. Featured on this album include musicians like Jason Hook, who was with Bullet Boys, Joey Scolari on guitars, Paul Marangoni on drums, along with Joey Greco, Ken Malandrino on bass, Ross Green on keyboards, Fabrizio Grossi on bass as well. Basically brought in his songwriter from Alias and Sheriff, the guy who wrote a lot of those songs with, Steve DeMarchi, to write with him, along with Jeff Paris, Mark Ribler, and Bob Marlette, among others. So a lot of people involved in this project, one way or another. But this was the only album of this project, and after this was released in 2006, he went back to Alias, and they released their second album 19 years after their self-titled debut. The second album was Never Say Never, released in 2009. Alias's first album is amazing. I think we've talked about it on the podcast. You should definitely check it out if you haven't. He's gone on to release albums with a band called Who's Your Daddy? 3 of them, in fact. Don't know anything about that band. They're not a Frontiers band, so they did not show up on my countdown. But it does not appear there's going to be any more Zion music, as far as I can tell. You can't find this album on streaming services, which became a problem. So basically what I did is I went into YouTube Music and I looked up every track one by one, and about 2/3 to 3/4 of them were available on somebody's YouTube page. So I listened to the album that way. So if you want to listen to this album, and if you're a fan of Alias and Sheriff, I would encourage you to try to find it, because it's good stuff. Like, it's not amazing, but it's very solid. There's some bluesy rock tracks on here. Overall, it's like I said, it's solid. The songs are a bit generic, but they sound good. The vocals are strong, as you would expect. It really doesn't do much good to give you standout tracks. I didn't get to listen to all the tracks, and maybe I missed some of the standout tracks. But overall, it's solid. If you can find a copy of the album, I encourage you to listen to it front to back and get the vibe of it. But this happens so much with Frontiers, where it's just they put a project together, it's together for one album, and then poof, it's gone. And in this case, if it's long enough ago, which was 2006, it may have never made it onto streaming services at that point. And Frontiers is evidently in no hurry to go back and put it on streaming services so people like me can find it, 20 years later and try to listen to it. So it's been an interesting run through the Frontier stuff. A lot of really good stuff. A lot of bands that, I would have never, ever learned about like this one without going through this list. But I give Frontiers a lot of credit. They've kept a lot of really strong music alive over the years and continue to do so as we move forward into 2026.
Yeah, and I mentioned it in the chat earlier. I just wonder what the market looks like for what they do, because clearly it's successful enough to continue doing it. It's just from the American perspective, where you feel like this music has no audience any longer. It's encouraging to know that it must. You just kind of wonder what kind of numbers they're pulling in some other territories, because clearly, I mean, I'm sure there are enough rock fans here still that buy the stuff. You just never hear about it. But it's a shame you can't find it. I checked eBay even, and I couldn't find the CD on sale on eBay. Just from a preservation standpoint, it's like, yeah, maybe this wasn't the most sought after release, but it's somebody's work, and you want to know that it's available somewhere.
Yeah, and I think that's the one thing, I would always rather have a physical release over a streaming release, but I would like for there to at least be a streaming release.
Yeah.
So it feels like there's some sort of record of this having existed. I think that would be really sad to create something and spend all that time and energy doing that, and then it just like it never happened.
Yeah.
That's really tough. So, but that wraps up my run through Frontiers. It's been a fun, not quite a year, because we had a couple of weeks that only had one letter, but almost a year of going through the Frontiers bands, which was a lot of fun. Be starting 2 gimmicks next week. I have a yearly one I'm going to do, but it's just to kind of keep it balanced. I'll do that every other week that Mike does his yearly one. So we'll save that one for a couple weeks from now, where I'm going to go through and find one-hit wonders from starting in 1969 and listen to the entire album that one-hit wonder came on and see whether it's any good or not. Because over the years, we've talked about how I have been burned before by buying an album because of a one-hit wonder song.
Yeah.
And it turns out the rest of the album is terrible. I'll never forget Len and Steal My Sunshine, and the album was Can't Stop the Bum Rush, I think it was.
What
And
was the good song on that album?
that was the only good song. It wasn't great, but
Yeah.
it was catchy and popular, and it's just like, the rest of this album is not good at all. So
I would love to see a breakdown when it's all over, as far as how many of them it was the only good song, how many had some other pretty decent songs, and then how many did you determine that there was another song on the album that you actually liked better than the hit?
that's an
I'm
interesting
curious how
idea.
often that ever happens.
It's an interesting idea. I may have to categorize that out, and we'll have a data report at the end of this gimmick. But the other one Mike actually suggested, and I'll start that one next week. I'm not sure which band I'm going to take on first, but the idea is to basically pick one of my favorite bands and listen to every one of their albums, one right after the other. That works better, I think, as an every other week thing, just so you're not getting the fault being the same band every week for like a few months. But I'm not sure. I've thought about Journey potentially. A band that kind of interests me to do this with is a group like REO Speedwagon, who had a different lead singer at the start of their. So I'm kind of curious, like what their stuff sounded like pre Kevin Cronin. Lots of great options. Obviously, some of the big bands, like a band like Chicago's had like 30 albums, so you could spend a whole year on Chicago. So I don't know. I'll figure that out this week, but that'll be what we're starting with next week on the Vault. It should be interesting, just because some of those bands, as we've talked about, are greatest hits bands to me, even to this day. And it's like, well, what does the rest of their stuff sound like? So.
Any band that their heyday came and went prior to you really being old enough to listen to music intentionally, I think that always ends up being the case. It's like, by the time I was paying attention to music, Journey had long since, they might have had one hit left at that point. But, it is what it is. But I'm curious about that too, because there's definitely some bands out there that I would like to know their whole catalog, even though I don't right now.
Yeah, so I would kind of lean toward either Journey or REO Speedwagon starting next week, but I will let you know that when we get to next week's episode, which of course means we have reached the end of this week's episode of the Hard Rock Empire. Thank you so much for joining us once again. A lot of really good stuff this week, more good stuff next week as we talk the music of February the 27th. Looking forward to bringing that to you next Sunday night, normal time, 7 o'clock Eastern time, and again, that's Eastern Daylight Time on the East Coast of the U.S., Sunday night. Join us for that on the Hard Rock Empire. Big thanks to Chris for joining us in the chat. Big thanks to Mike, as always, for his hard work on this podcast. And a big thanks to you for listening whenever and wherever. And a big thanks to Stove Lake Media for their continued support of the podcast. We'll join you again next Sunday night at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. Until then, don't forget to join the Empire, the Hard Rock Empire.